Before 2008, every Filipino that was wealthy, or any Filipino, will convert their money to dollars. And that's why there's always this constant exodus of money. So before, when you made money, regardless of source, you will convert it to dollars, give it to your banker, and the banker will say, thank you very much, let's ship it to Switzerland, to the US. With AMLA, you couldn't do that anymore. So the exit got shut. So all the money's trapped here.
That makes so much sense now. There's just not much liquidity in the secondary market, right?
Yes, because nobody can afford the upfront or take a loan,
Right.
or they're scared. They're scared to take loans, especially in those times. Especially the early parts of the
Yeah.
cycle,
Uh-huh.
interest rates were higher than what they are today.
Right. Was this liquidity issue always a problem here on the
Always,
secondary market?
always,
It's
always,
it's
forever.
never it's always been there, right? Even when interest rates were lower.
When interest rates were lower, like when they were down to 4 to 5% for
Uh-huh.
the regular higher end home mortgage,
Yeah.
it eased up a bit.
Uh-huh.
But then that didn't last long, di ba?
Right.
So we had 4 or 5 year,
Uh-huh.
or maybe an 8 year run
Mm-hmm.
where interest rates were at 5, 6%.
But a lot of people wasn't taking up home loans, and a lot of sellers weren't even willing to accept it, right?
A lot of sellers, yes, because they don't want the hassle of
Mm-hmm.
waiting, because the bank ties you down for 2, 3 months. It's so
Right.
inefficient. It's so inefficient.
Right.
They have to do DD, they have to do appraisal, they have to triple check the title and then move the title from one name to another
Right.
with the mortgage, the lien. That takes time, and
Right.
many sellers don't want to be impaired by that.
And then I bet a big percentage of them fall out, no?
Yeah, yeah, and a percentage of them fall out. But I could say that there was a sweet spot when we had an 8 year good run, and that was the first time that interest rates were actually reasonable. And
What years was this?
the first level of QE, so maybe I would say 2010,
Okay.
the first time that governments around the world dropped interest rates
So the
to almost
Philippines just
nothing.
followed the US for the
No, the
same
whole
reason.
world. The
Yeah,
whole
the whole
world
world did, yeah.
follows the US. Prior to 2008 or 2009, so I think QE really happened in 2009,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of spread through the world in 2010. Um, you had interest rates that were incredibly punitive in Philippines. You couldn't take a 5 year loan for less than, I think a 5 year loan back then was 8, 10% a year. If you took a 10 year loan, it would be 10, 12%. But that was the first time, so
Wow.
prior to that, that was the first time that you were able to get 10 year interest rates for 10%.
Jeez.
Yeah.
So
And that's still 40%, 30% upfront.
wait, 40% down, 30, 40% down, 10-year with a balloon payment at the end, or all
No,
amortized within 10
amortized
years?
over 10
Then it
years.
doesn't make sense because the payments would be way too high.
For many people,
Yeah.
yes. For many people, yes. But that really came down when QE happened all around the world. And then from 10% per annum, you're able to get 5% per annum for 5 years fixed.
Oh,
That's
okay.
massive,
Discount.
massive,
Yeah.
massive. And then the 10 year loans were trading at between 7 and 10%.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you cannot compare it to the first world.
It,
Cannot.
is it because the banks can't sell their paper after a few years? They have to
It's
hold the
credit
loan for.
rating. Credit
Is it
rating.
just credit rating?
Credit rating, which is a mixture of how much the government has fiscally,
Uh-huh.
so the fiscal position of the government,
Right.
the position of the balance sheet of the banks,
Yeah.
the transparency of the banking industry,
Right.
which took a while, like
Uh-huh.
forever. For
Right.
example, um, prior to the Pinoy administration, you couldn't have any transparency
Right.
on bank accounts, not even the government.
Right.
And then the Pinoy administration changed that, but limited only to peso. So if you had a dollar account,
Oh,
it
you can
was
hide your fund. Yeah.
impervious. I mean, it was impervious. Yeah,
Wow.
you could not pierce through the accounts,
Right.
and that's why so many people had U.S. bank accounts. And then in the Duterte administration, we brought that to even higher transparency.
Uh-huh.
because the US government said if you are going to be any
Holding a
dollar,
dollar. Yeah.
any dollar asset, regardless of the asset, for as long as it's in US dollars, that the US government
Couldn't
should have a
have.
say.
Right. And
Should have a say.
they can take a peek at that
And they
one.
can pierce through the veils,
Right.
regardless. And if you don't comply with that, your credit rating will be X. So we were forced to do halfway measures closer to full transparency, which is why the credit rating in the Philippines has been the best it's ever been in history. And that's why you see that in the long term T bills are the lowest it's been in all of history up until this big spike in interest rates. But
But
prior to that, it was very low in the Philippines, unlike in the US. The Philippines tax authority have no teeth,
right.
but it is a rapid.
Yeah, this is a
So
very interesting topic that I've been trying to understand.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. There's big issues on transparency. For example, many people don't. So I was talking about the IRS equivalent in Philippines, BIR,
Right.
is notorious for extorting money from
Right.
people,
Right.
extorting money, but that never goes to the coffers.
Right.
A small portion of that goes to the coffers. So the average, the tax collection efficiency in the Philippines is probably just 18%. So
18%
so
of
what that
what it should
means,
be.
what you should be collecting, what you're actually collecting is only 18%.
Right.
One
So
eight.
there's such a overwhelming stigma that the government, you know, they pocket that tax money and not utilize it. But they don't probably realize how much of it is undertaxed and actually, under collected.
There is hypocrisy on both sides. Okay.
Right.
The government officials, I mean, corruption is everywhere in government, but
Right.
corruption is also prevalent in the private sector,
Right.
right? So we all know the hypocrisy in the government side, right? They're there to collect taxes and they pretend like, at least majority of
Yeah.
politicians will
Right.
say something but do something else. But which is not to say there are no good politicians. I'm
Right.
relieved to see firsthand that there are actually a number of very competent people in government.
Right.
Okay, both the national, local, and other offices. But there's also all these people in business that want to make change happen for the Philippines, and they all march wherever. They all say these things. They all talk in the chat groups like, "Why is this person
Right.
so corrupt? Why is this person so corrupt?" Or whatever. But they'll never pay the tax.
Right.
When it comes to them doing a deal or paying their taxes, they will find every way to skirt around it.
Right.
The justification is that, oh, because if I pay it, they're just going to steal it. So why am I going to give my money away? It's so hard earned, and all they do is harass me.
Right. I in the States, when you apply for a mortgage anywhere in the world, a lot of it is like your source of income, and they need to see your tax returns. They need to see valid proof of like income, right? Now, if you're just like a middle class worker, you're working for a BPO or
Company.
a company, you're gonna be able to show that easily.
Yeah.
But if you're a business owner or whatnot, and these are the people who do have the money,
Mm,
right? They're gonna have a harder time. I imagine because they're probably, underreporting your income. So
mm,
that's probably gonna play into effect on how,
mm,
credit ratings,
mm.
being able to qualify and things like that.
Which is why the banks who have developed very good relationships with their clients who are borrowing money
Hmm.
understand that most businesses will have two or three books.
Right.
You know, one book for the government, one book for the wife.
Right.
Just kidding. And then one book for the real set of books where the real money is made and
Yeah.
how the real money is flowing in and out of the business.
We should do another podcast about the book for the wife. We could probably do unpack a bunch of stuff there. But I won't ask you about that yet.
So, so yeah, so I was saying earlier that many people don't want to pay the tax because they don't want their hard-earned money just get stolen. They're just
Right.
giving it away, right?
Right.
But we also have to appreciate that thinking that way is not going to solve the problem.
Oh, yeah.
You can say, okay, the 100 million that I should have paid in tax this year, I will just report 20.
Mhm.
And the 80, what am I going to do with it? I don't
Right.
give it away.
Right.
I just keep it and spend it.
Right.
And many times when it comes to actually giving money away to people who you don't know, have no relations to, you're constantly scrimping.
Right.
And that's the mindset that we have to change.
Yeah.
If you think that you don't want to give the tax money to the government because it's going to be stolen and it's hard-earned money, then whatever the difference is, give it away somewhere
Right.
where you trust that it's going to be deployed properly.
They're
And
not
then
going to do
get
that though. Come on.
and take the tax receipt, deductible receipt.
Well, you think if the government was more transparent about how they spend their money, would they be a little bit more willing to pay
it's
their
impossible
taxes?
because no government in the world aside from Singapore has been able
Right.
to demonstrate that that's sustainable.
Right. They're trying to do that in the U.S. right now with these guys. Do you think it's going to happen?
Come on, Wall Street is all full of scams and frauds, and there's what, 2 people
Right.
went to jail.
Well, I mean, everything is based on financial reporting. That you have your big five.
Look at the
auditing,
look at the credit ratings agencies who were partly responsible, blatantly responsible for all the havoc that we went through in 2008 and 9. And what? Look at the penalties that the banks were imposed on. They're rounding numbers.
Right.
You have bailout money in 2008, and then it went to bonuses for one person.
Right. The whole '08 thing, and we all just kind of accepted it, right?
And it's going to happen again very soon.
Right. Where do you think it's going to happen?
Yeah, everywhere.
In the real estate space? Or?
No. Global.
Because of the big debt that they've taken on.
Yeah, I look at it this way, right? The NASDAQ, the Dow Jones, the S&P, most European indexes, Japan are all hitting all-time highs. But is the Japanese economy at all-time high?
No.
It's probably one of the lowest it's been in the last 40 years.
Well, it's growing. It's seeing inflation.
Okay.
There is, because, when the currency is this low, it encourages foreign investment, right?
Depends on how stable it is. If they feel that it's stable, yes. But if it's volatile, then you could get wiped out. You could be coming in really cheap, but it'll get offset with the next devaluation.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
you're hoping that you come in the devaluation phase and then exit when it's appreciating.
Well, Japan's in an interesting situation. They can't play with their interest rates too much, right? So they're in a situation where, they've kind of printed their way into zero negative interest rates, and everyone's on an adjustable rate mortgage, right? They can't bankrupt the country by raising interest rates. So they've taken that flexibility away from them, right? And you saw what happened recently when they raised
Black Monday.
Yeah, when they raised the interest rates.
Yeah.
And I've been saying that, like, as long as there's an interest rate disparity between the U.S. and Japan, the Japanese yen is going to stay cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah. The minute they start raising rates, it really opened the eyes to how much liquidity actually came from Japan.
Yeah.
Because Japan's a bit of an anomaly. They can just print and print and print at zero interest rate and not see any inflation and not see hyperinflation.
Because nobody's spending.
Right. Yeah. Well, that, and they have a demographic crisis and stuff like that. Yeah. And, so, but this is a really good discussion because you're the first one who's willing to talk to me about this, or actually can talk about it in depth. You were talking about like taxes, right? Did you hear about this tax reform that Marcos signed?
Yeah, the Crate Bill.
It's called I forgot the acronym, but it's basically to evaluate properties in a standard international way.
Yeah.
So that they can collect property taxes a lot easier. So what this is going to mean is that people are probably going to have to, because a lot of properties are bought undervalued, right, to avoid capital gains tax, right? So that won't matter anymore, and so they're going to say, okay, your property is valued.
The zonal value.
Your zonal value, right?
It's going to replace the zonal value concept.
Right.
And it's going to raise real estate taxes every year that you pay on assets that you own.
Right. How do you think this is going to affect the real estate market?
It will be painful for many, I think. It will force people to go rent rather than own. It will probably bring us to more institutional ownership rather than individual ownership. And I think it'll be great if they're able to also offset it by reducing income taxes further. Okay? So Why? Because this is what Hong Kong did. Hong
Uh-huh.
Kong has super low personal income tax, super low
Mhm.
corporate income tax. Like corporate income tax is like 70%, and personal income tax only kicks in at a certain level and at 16% only. So super low.
Right.
And there's no
One of the
capital
best.
gains.
Yeah.
There's no capital gains. There's no withholding tax of almost any kind.
Right.
There's VAT, but that's on consumption. And, or maybe there's no VAT. I don't remember. There's no inheritance tax,
Hmm.
I think, if I remember correctly. But where they get it back is real estate tax.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's got the highest punitive real estate taxes in the world.
It's also the highest property prices.
And it's one of the highest. Well, not anymore. They've come down a long way. They're probably half of the values they were like 2-3 years ago.
Aren't they still the number one most expensive in Asia?
Not anymore.
Is it Singapore now or
It's
Taiwan?
probably still Taiwan and probably Tokyo. Some parts of Tokyo. Like I think Ginza is still holding the record for land.
Yeah, but that's a very. If you average all of Japan, it's not even close. Japan's actually
Yeah,
way
but you
better.
gotta compare like to like.
Right.
Also, you have to compare like to
But if
like.
you compare all of Tokyo, it's not that high. Not even
Yeah.
close.
Okay. So, but they've come a long way. But Hong Kong is smart that way. That okay, I'll tax you based on the square meters footprint, and there's no escaping that.
Mm-hmm.
And particular districts have particular zones and particular prices, so it's very easy to tax people. And so if you're wealthier, you upgrade your house. If you're not so wealthy, you'll downgrade.
Okay.
So the market for living finds its place. So
Mhm.
every person will find your place in the market.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you tax people. Very simple. There's very little stuff to corrupt for corruption. There's no discernment. There's no like, oh, maybe you're hiding this or maybe you're hiding that.
Right.
Very simple. Here's the drawing. That's your tax base. Period.
So the corruption comes in where you give someone a subjective choice on what the valuation should
Evaluation, yeah. An assessment.
be. Assessment.
Yeah.
And that's where
When
the
you
corruption
allow them
comes in.
to assess and have discernment.
Right.
That's where negotiations come in.
Okay, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Right. And the rest of the world does it similar in some sort of standard format.
Yeah.
Right. And then the Philippines are doing this. So two things can happen. It's going to raise a lot of property taxes, right?
Mm.
So, but there pros and cons. I mean, could there be pros that comes out of this? I mean, they're saying, now we can have transparency in valuation or real estate,
Mm-hmm.
right? This is something we're obviously lacking, right?
Mm.
This can also create an artificial bubble because we don't really know what the exact valuation of a property, right? So the other part of it is, can this additional tax revenue actually go into real infrastructure spending that is
Well,
really
that's a
needed?
different problem. That's a
right?
different issue. That's a different problem. So every leader that we will have will impose their own criteria on where that money is going to go. For a long time, it's been to education. For a long time, it's been to salaries of government officials. Yeah. So this last two administrations, a big chunk of it is going to infrastructure, which is badly needed. And I think that's great. And I think it will continue,
Right.
depending on how things play out in the next 2 years or the next 2 weeks.
Or until the next administration change.
That's what I'm referring to.
Yeah. What do you think do you think there could be a time where we have transparency in the real estate market here in terms of properties, transactions, getting a hold of like real market trends and valuations, things like that?
Well, okay. There's been a great amount of improvement in transparency in the last 20 years. Okay. Before it was super opaque. Now it's like you can get a lot of information online and credible information online. Yes, there's a lot of junk, but there's also a lot of credible information online.
Like what?
Like information transactions, like understanding the concept of accommodation value, about master planning communities and townships, and the accommodation value of transactions, of deals and land.
Okay, so that's transparent.
That is, you can get those those data points
Uh-huh.
online from
Uh-huh.
credible sources, which weren't there before. So you didn't really know how to value properties when they're plot ratios of X versus Y. They all think that, oh, they're beside each other, they should be the same value, but
Right.
they don't understand the concept of plot ratio or FAR.
Right.
So those things are a lot more transparent now than they were 20 years ago.
What is plot ratio in FAR?
It's the simplest way I can put it is that every plot of land is given a particular amount of density you can
Uh-huh.
build. So
Okay.
it's a number that you
Oh,
attach to a
yeah.
lot
It's a buildable area in a lot.
that governs your buildable
Yeah.
area. And why is that important? Because every plot of land cannot have you cannot just build to infinity
Right.
with as far as your wallet can go,
Right.
because at a certain point it becomes a fire hazard.
Mm-hmm.
If a fire breaks out, can you evacuate people
Right.
enough? And then for if you're master planning a township, how
Mm-hmm.
much traffic are you going to be
Mm-hmm.
able to afford to have in this area
Right.
to account for roads, power, cabling, water, sewage
Right.
systems, wastewater,
Right.
waste management? All those things come into play when you know the density, and then you enforce the rules so that your house here is not going to be right beside another guy who decides to
Built a
change,
skyscraper.
build a skyscraper or build a funeral parlor or stuff like that,
Right.
a funeral home. So those are the things that give that's rare in the Philippines up
Right.
until 20 years ago. So what many people don't know is that there's about 200 townships right now under
Mm-hmm.
construction all over the Philippines.
Right.
And that's transforming the country,
Uh-huh.
to give people today what they only see in developed countries, which is what? Sensible, logical master planning,
Mm-hmm.
pedestrian lanes, sidewalks, parks, hospitals, fire stations, stuff like that. That's happening all over the Philippines,
Right.
and it's not just Manila.
So in other like first world countries, this urban planning is usually done by the county, right? Government municipalities, right?
Yeah,
What there should be the LGUs here, right?
yeah,
But here, the proper guy, the guys who do it correctly are the major conglomerates who develop major townships,
because there's less corruption.
right? Because they're
Because you don't entrust a group of people in the local government to, let's say, 1 billion pesos worth of infrastructure
right,
budget just for them to skim off 80% of it.
right.
You know,
So that's the real truth.
that's and there's less corruption in private sector,
Well, I mean,
and that's
sink or
why.
swim in the private sector, right?
Well, not necessarily, because they can also buy off the politicians and the decisions and all
Right.
these other things. But there's enough check and balances in the private sector to minimize the corruption.
Uh-huh.
Not eradicate it 100%, but I think it's a lot lower than, let's say, in the public sector where
Mm.
everyone is in play.
Hmm. If you don't mind, I want to ask you some like personal, uh, questions about yourself. Nothing. One thing I hear a lot when I hear about David Leechiu
Okay.
is I hear the word self-made.
Okay.
And so, initially, I know you're also Chinese Filipino, right?
Yeah.
In my mind, Chinese Filipinos are very well connected, family business, a lot of legacy business passed on from generation to generation. You think about movies like Crazy Rich Asians,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, but here with you, I hear you kind of started from, kind of started on your own and really kind of built your own legacy,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is really impressive
Thank you.
for anyone in the Philippines because, generally speaking, most people don't do it that way. It's just through a lot of big name families and stuff like that. Can you tell us a little bit about your story and your experience and your background?
So maybe first of all, I wouldn't really call it self-made because a lot of people helped me along the way. And I
Okay.
think the biggest asset I had was goodwill of people.
All right.
So a lot of people gave me a chance and gave me business because they trusted us to do it. And I guess the short short story is that my parents lost everything in the 80s when the country is going through so much political turmoil. Interest rates went up to 25, 30, 40%. Inflation was like 20%.
Wow.
We kicked out Marcos, uh, and then when we put Cory Aquino, President Cory Aquino, we had 9 coups under her administration, plus everything else that slowed her down. You've got the blend between the ebbing of communism and
Hmm.
the coming tide of democracy, and self-righteous but incompetent people working around her, that resulted in very solidly nationalistic policies that we still suffer from today. We closed the country from foreign. We were very anti-foreign, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the environment that many people had. The exodus of Filipinos were building up in the 80s, the
Right.
decade. It started in the 60s, but it really ramped up in the 80s with the tightening of the dictatorship, assassination, coup d'etat,
Hmm.
president, plus 9 other coup d'etats. It
Jeez.
was crazy. Ramos gave stability, but it wasn't also the most transparent
Right.
administration. And then after Ramos, you had 3 more administrations of coup d'etats. You know,
How old were you around
I
that time?
was 10.
10.
One day I woke up with like, we had 3 cars at that time. And then one day I woke up with no cars,
Okay.
and
Okay.
then furniture started to disappear.
And you didn't know what was going on back
Yeah,
then,
I was
did
a
you
kid.
really?
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
a kid. And then we all had to work, and I guess what helped me adapt to all that was at a very young age, Chinese families, first of all, was not a democracy. It's a dictatorship of the
Oh, yeah.
absolutely draconian kind. And I don't know, you're Chinese, you should know what I'm talking about. Although you're very
I want to
Western,
ask you.
you
I do want to ask you about this, but go on.
so draconian, and no. So we worked on weekends, we worked on holidays, and my parents worked very hard, and we did very, very menial things. We were buying stuff let's say food in the morning, sell that in the afternoon, go back in the evening, pay that person off who lent us the goods in the morning.
Holy cow.
And then whatever we saved up for that day, we would buy in the market before it closes for food the next 2 days. We had no savings. We had nothing in the ref except ice. Stuff like that. It was really hard. And that's the plight of many people back then. Very few actually survived those years gracefully.
Right.
Everyone a lot of people had to leave the country for work. And it was really, really retching for many people.
So, was a lot of Chinese Filipino families were they kind of going through some of the same turmoils? Like,
Yeah.
were they as prominent as they are today?
Hmm, hmm.
Not even back then, right?
No. I mean, okay, for some, SM built their first big mall in North EDSA. It opened, and it's like, why? Why would you open a big mall at a time when it's and yet boom, just then
Right.
the second big mall, the third big mall,
Uh
and
huh.
then many, many malls after. Um, I remember a friend of ours, Felix Ang, who has the Mercedes Benz franchise in
Uh
Philippines.
huh.
He opened his first store, the first Mercedes showroom on EDSA in the 80s. And that evening or the next day, they were having a coup d'etat. It's like, what the hell?
Jesus.
And the interest
Yeah.
rates went through. And then you're importing all these fancy cars, right?
Yeah.
When the currency went from, I don't know, 10 pesos to 12 to 18 to 20 very, very quickly.
That's
So
crazy.
those are really tough times, really, really tough times. And the corruption is just, I remember my first flight in and out because I have an aunt who was wealthy enough to support my parents. So she made sure that we went to school, made sure we didn't starve, gave us, allowed us to live in a house that she didn't use. And, uh, and I remember being dragged to China, and on the way back, she had to give money to every person that was blocking her way from the plane to out the terminal
Why did they?
because
Why
the
her?
clerks the clerks the clerks would expect that you're bringing in goods that you don't want to have customs clear through.
Ah,
I don't know
okay.
what I mean. I wouldn't call it smuggling because it's not like we're bringing in,
So
you
they
know,
just knew you guys came from China, not because you guys
no,
were. They
no.
knew you were.
Every person who went abroad and coming back into the
Ah,
Philippines
okay.
was okay. You seem like you have some
Right.
capacity, so you want us to open your bag or not?
Yeah.
And then we'll just keep picking on everything that you have there. Whether it's one item, two items, 10 items. We're not talking about a box of like 100 pieces of something,
Yeah.
you know? I wouldn't even say commercial value, but the harassment that you get in customs in the air, in
Yeah.
what you and I take for granted today,
Yeah.
very different experience in the 70s and 80s,
Yeah.
no? So it was a very different world back in the 80s. But also, the 80s was the decade of the best music humanity ever had. So
Yes, I have to
so
agree. I grew up in the 80s. So,
so um
what was it, New Wave?
yeah, yeah. Only anyway. No, not pop, not pop. But yeah. But along the way, so many people helped my family, and that allowed us to get a leg up in almost everything. So my mom and dad worked very hard. So we went from no cars to a few years, and then after that, one car,
Right.
and we
I,
stayed with one car for a long time. You know.
I know, I know you, you think I'm very Western, right? But I had Chinese parents, right?
Okay.
And they were war refugees from Vietnam,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Uneducated,
Okay.
right? So
Brutal.
brutal. So I was just gonna ask you what your upbringing was like. Did you have the tiger mom, the dad? Did you get the, the whip in the corner ready to go? What was like,
Yeah.
what was it like for you
No,
growing
no,
up?
no.
I
I
could tell
think
you some stories.
I think no, no, not in this platform. But all I can say is that my parents genuinely cared for us
Uh-huh.
and loved us despite all the crap we had to live through.
Okay.
It was not easy. It was quite brutal.
Were they tough? They were tough on
Yeah,
you
yeah,
guys.
they're tough. But
We'll say,
my mother a lot more nurturing, I would say, than
uh-huh.
my dad.
Okay.
Typical. You
Yeah.
either have a super alpha, hyper
Yeah.
alpha male or a
Yeah.
hyper alpha female in the house.
Right. Right. So either you have the like super like dictator dad or the tiger mom,
Yeah, yeah.
but you don't have both. Not
You
generally.
cannot have both. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. You cannot have both.
So, in Chinese family, it's their form of love, right? To be tough,
Mm. Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So, you
With a
know,
mix of it's today it's called PTSD or something.
yeah. Somehow everyone's a victim of their parents and
Yeah.
trauma and stuff like
In
that.
Asian families.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, my family were from the south of China. We migrated to Vietnam because of, the Cultural
Or
Revolution
yeah.
and communism. And then, my parents were born in Vietnam. Um, and my grandparents had gone through famine, right? So they've gone through a very rough time. And then my parents were poor in Vietnam. Um, and they left Vietnam after the Vietnam War. But we never considered ourselves Vietnamese, whereas Chinese Filipinos would really call themselves Filipinos, and they actually sometimes change their name, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in here, the Chinese community is much more immersed in the culture here.
I think that's our generation. The ones above us
No,
they consider themselves very mainland. Although I keep telling my parents, guys, you're more Chinese than the mainland Chinese, because
because you never evolved.
you preserved culture. You
Uh,
preserved Confucianism
okay.
in your system, which is rare now in the
Hmm.
Chinese population,
Right.
you know?
It's a funny thing is I actually thought I had it harder growing up than like say if you I look at the Asian kids from Asia and I looked at myself and I thought I had it much harder because my parents when they left Vietnam in the 1970s they never evolved,
Mhm, mhm,
you know they never assimilated
mhm.
in America. So growing up you had very two. your parents tell you one thing, and then growing up in the US, you have to
Education
fit in.
system.
Like you're not going to make it
Yeah,
if you don't fit in
yeah, yeah.
and you don't adopt American ways, which
So
was
became white.
so anti-Chinese
Yeah,
family, right?
yeah, yeah,
Everything you were doing was wrong.
yeah.
You deserve a spanking for almost anything you do, right? So you
And you
can't have
can't
fun.
and you can't report to the police either.
No, no, hell no. If you threaten that, it'd be like, go ahead.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, no, it was funny.
So,
So I looked at I kind of I observed you guys and I was like, "Oh, you guys are very different than us growing up in the States, right? And identity wise. But here it's come a long way because like when you think about Filipino Chinese here, you think about they're very very business savvy, very well connected. Do you go to Savior?
mm-mm,
Yeah, so
mm.
all the Savior kids own, and you guys pretty much run the Philippines,
Well, maybe
for the most part. I mean, you guys run a lot of the
it's
big
coincidental.
businesses, right?
Coincidental.
Coincidental, right? So it's interesting because it's this Filipino Chinese community. I have a lot of respect for them, but this is kind of like the stereotype. But compared to what you were telling me about back in the '80s, it was totally different. It's changed so much,
Hmm.
hasn't it?
Hmm. Hmm.
Why do you think that? Where do you think that change came from? Was it just like,
I think because the Chinese immigrants embraced Christianity for their next gen a lot more open. And therefore, here in the Philippines, they found a haven for Christian schools. Whether you went to the Jesuits or in Xavier Ateneo, or you went to the Dominicans or to the San Bedans or the Franciscans, they're all the private school education system
it's
is
Christian?
95% Christian.
Wow, I didn't
Yeah.
realize that.
There are very few Chinese schools, and even those ones, half of them were from Taiwan, also Christian, non-Catholic. And then you have the odd one or two school that is like, you know, under the radar
Uh
communist
huh.
China propaganda.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, do they have a more Confucius
There's
mentality?
no, after Mount, there's no
Right. Okay.
Confucius.
So that's why you said the older generation is so much different than the newer generation of Chinese
Yeah.
Americans. That's
And
interesting.
Chinese in general, because the ones who left China in the, Cultural Revolution
Uh huh.
preserved their Confucian heritage, whereas the
Like
ones
my
who stayed
grandparents and parents. Yeah.
got wiped out.
Right.
You know,
Right.
the biggest culling
Mhm.
in, I think, history, self-culling. I mean, the
Right.
whole Cultural Revolution, right?
Right.
If you were intellectual, you'd be
Yeah.
slain.
Right.
If you weren't a farmer,
Right.
you'd be slain, right?
Right. Yeah, so my family, for whatever reason, felt like they were kind of persecuted out of Vietnam as well because Chinese were in Vietnam wasn't so assimilated to the community. They were kind of seen as the Jews, and so when the North Vietnamese came, there was fear, right, of what
Mm,
would happen, right?
mm-mm,
Obviously, all your assets would be confiscated,
mm-mm.
things like that. So yeah, so that's interesting. So you're in the Philippines and you built one of the biggest commercial real estate companies. I remember your name when you were I remember Jones Long LaSalle, right? And I remember your name was synonymous with Jones Long LaSalle.
I had my name attached to their
Yeah,
brand.
right.
Yeah,
And this is when I was just getting started with Zip Match and Home Match and
yeah.
stuff like that. And so I knew about you. And then all of a sudden, you you kind of built your own brand with David Lee Chu as the brand.
Yeah, well, that was the second round because I worked for Savills in the Philippines. When times were so rough here, they decided to close down and said, "Okay, we'll close down the business, but we like you. Do you want to run your own franchise of our business?" So I ran that franchise for 5 years.
Which was with Savos, not
Yeah, it is called Leechiu and Associates, an international a member of Savills International.
and this wasn't with Jones Long
That
LaSalle
was in
yet.
just so I was independent
Okay.
with Savills, and Savills was a UK company. Even though they had offices worldwide, 90% of revenue came from the UK,
Uh-huh.
and 10% came from Hong Kong. And rounding numbers for everything else. Okay, they had a very strong hold of Hong Kong. And then when we grew the business to the scale that we did in the Philippines back then, Jones Lang came and said, "Hey, we want to expand here in the Philippines. Can we buy you?" And I obviously, after competing with them for so long, I look at that with so much suspicion, right? It's like, okay, whatever. But then anyway, we were able to do a deal. And so I folded into the Jones Lang network. And in Philippines, they had 15 offices. In Asia, they had 15 offices, 15 countries operating. And Philippines was either number 14 or 15
Mm-hmm.
every year between us and Indo. Us and Indo, bottom, 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 second
Uh-huh.
bottom, bottom.
Right.
But we were able to grow that to that position is number 7.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it is a very good ride. And I'm glad to have been able to put the Philippines on the map for an international brand.
So this is when you were with JL. Did
Yeah.
you
I had
did you
8
have
years
good
there.
reasons to be suspicious about the deal?
No,
No.
I think, well, yeah, because, this is a guy who's been trying to smother and compete with
Competition, right?
us.
Yeah.
And now they want to come in and do a deal with us.
Right.
And so I was suspicious for a bit, but then I realized quickly that they were genuine about it.
Mm-hmm.
It also helped that my former boss, Lindsay Orr, my boss in Saddles,
Mm-hmm.
crossed over to Jones Lang at some point in his career. And he's the one who guided Jones Lang to do a deal with us, together
I
with
see.
his bosses, Chris Fossick, Peter Barge, and those guys. Who are great people. They're great people. Except that after 8 years of giving my life to them, I felt that there were things that were too structured, impractical, and I was probably better off being on my own again. And that's why after 2015, I left after 8 years and set up this Leechiu Part 2. So Leechiu Property Consultants.
And so like the commercial real estate space, how much of it is dominated by foreign companies versus local
Um,
Filipinos?
if you look at the pie of revenue, a big chunk of it is still foreign based. Where if you look at the total revenue since we started, we are the largest. If you had all the brokerage revenues
Mm-hmm.
in the 9 years that LPC has been in existence, we are largest amongst the amongst the commercial brokers, but we're not majority. So they're probably 60% of the pie, and we're 40% of the pie
So you're 40% of the pie, but you're bigger than any other entity,
by revenue. By revenue,
right?
yeah,
By revenues.
and transaction volume.
I see. Wow. So there's not a lot of local players in that, is there?
No, no, very few.
So how did you kind of win and carve out this niche?
I think I had very good mentors. I had very good mentors. The Cuervo family, if you know them, who's a very old, established name in Philippine real estate. Uh, they really educated me, helped me. I had my first real estate job with them. Second is people like Mark Townsend and Jonathan Hannum, Anthony Biddle, who became very good friends and mentors to me when I was starting my career. And they taught me everything that I need to know about the technical side of the business. And then life just helped me figure out the people side of it.
So what is the thing that can you share with us some of the the most important teachings that these mentors gave you to
I
kind of
think,
help you win in
yeah,
this?
I think competence, transparency, and looking at things, even though it's hard to look at it. Just call it as it is and face the realities that it is what it is. There's no point fudging things.
Uh-huh.
So if the end of the world is coming, you better call it.
Uh-huh.
And yeah.
So is it really about staying one step ahead or two steps ahead?
It's about being brutally competent and transparent and honest about
Hmm.
your information. And then second, what I've learned about, so the other half of that is the non-technical stuff, the philosophical stuff about doing business in Philippines, living in Philippines, is that you have to accept that life will be brutal because of all the inefficiencies, right?
Right.
It's super inefficient. Traffic is inefficient. Hospital lines inefficient. Basically, the queuing eats up half your life every day, right? You're queuing for coffee, queuing
Absolutely.
for a ride, you're queuing for
Yeah.
your grab, you're queuing for your turn in paying for the hospital bill, but then you're also queuing after that for the procedure, then after that
Yeah.
for the doctor's clinic, which should
Yeah.
take an hour or two. I mean, you're always waiting for something here, and that alone is inefficient. But then you've got systems inefficiency, you've got government inefficiency, you've got
Uh-huh.
private sector. I mean, inefficiencies everywhere. But one of the things that really struck out summarizes the thinking is a guy named Edward Lee. Edward Lee, the founder of Citysec Online, what is now called Call Financial, the largest online stock brokerage in Philippines, and he said he's never met a wealthy pessimist.
All right.
Okay,
Yeah.
he's never
That's a
met
very
a
good point.
wealthy pessimist.
Right.
So so in a way, you cannot be pessimistic and succeed in life.
And it's so
So
easy to be
it's
pessimistic
so
here.
easy to be pessimistic in the Philippines. So you have to see problems and acknowledge them, and you have to face it and
Yeah.
accept them as reality, right? But you cannot also deny the good things that are happening despite all these problems.
Right.
So despite all this negativity, you have to find your light,
Right.
and that's what's going to drive you to succeed.
And in business, you are about solving problems,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
And it's
that's the
game over
value.
when all you can think about is like negativity.
Right.
Yeah. So in this process of for example, this process of that mindset was really tested on me. On me.
How
Brought to
so?
me by I guess the rest of the public during COVID because um I was one of the few voices of optimism, I would say, in the market during time of COVID when people were locked down and people were like trying to figure out what to do. And of course, I don't know the answers, but I worked very hard to kind of come to an assessment of the situation and how far it's going to go and all these things. And sometimes, I sent this Viber message to a small group of people, and a couple of them sent it to other people, and then it became like it was all over the
So
place,
the
and it was a
situation was
little,
that COVID, everyone was very
l-
negative and pessimistic,
yeah,
and you were kind
yeah,
of giving a positive outlook.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that rubbed people the wrong way.
Some people rubbed it the wrong way. Yeah, some people,
Yeah.
not all. I mean, a lot of people appreciated it.
What did you say specifically?
Like I think that there's a pandemic, but
Uh-huh.
we have the most tools today
Uh-huh.
to overcome it. So my timetable is that in 4 6 months we should have a virus that's out, a vaccine that should be out there and should be deployed here very quickly, and all this will be over.
And of course it took longer than that.
It took longer than that because government policies and
Right.
execution,
Obviously, we saw
but
what happened.
but the world produced a vaccine within 4 6 months,
Right.
right? A credible one that they rolled out all over the world.
Right.
Yeah. Um, a lot of other things like I always said that this crisis is going to produce more jobs in the BPO space, and it did.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, as we've seen it in a few other cycles, we saw that purchasing power continued to happen because of QE, and that saved a lot of people all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people complained that, oh, the Duterte administration is bankrupting the country because it's borrowing so much money.
Mm-hmm.
Then I flag out and say, hey, excuse me, it's COVID. Every government, with no exception
Doing
around
the
the
same.
world, borrowed to the hilt
Right.
to fund their way out of COVID. There's just no way out of
Right.
this, you know? People said stuff like, oh, we just can't stand it at home and nothing's happening to this government or to this country. And I go, no, because while we're locked in our house on
Mm-hmm.
lockdown, construction workers all over the country are trying to complete infrastructure projects that when you do come out and allowed out again, you will experience some of the best infra projects the Philippines has ever seen. And the Duterte
Hmm.
administration completed the most number of projects in every metric. So the Duterte administration completed the most number of infra projects
Uh-huh.
the Philippines has ever seen since the 60s
During COVID.
during COVID. No, but during his entire administration,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
And people don't appreciate that. And
Right.
I became known as the, Duterte defender. It's like, I'm
Right.
not, dude, I'm just stating facts, I mean, but anyway, but just imagine when you got out of lockdown, the first thing that people did was ride the Skyway from Alabang to Bulacan and back.
That's right.
Do you
That's
know,
right. I wasn't here. I was gone. And when
dude,
I came back, I'm like, whoa,
the tears in the eyes of people?
this would have taken so many years before, right?
Yeah, yeah. And now you traverse that distance in 20 minutes instead
Right.
of 3 hours.
Yeah.
The tears in people as they went through that loop, incredible.
Uh-huh.
And but said, that's the shit that we were talking about back then.
Right.
But it takes a while, and then w- as we try to be optimistic about the future, we're always like, oh, this guy's got an agenda. It's like, I don't know what agenda you're talking about, unless you're asking me to broker the deal for you,
Right.
there is no agenda.
Well, you're okay, so let's break that down a bit. So let's think about it. So you're every time someone wants to do a trend analysis, you're a guest speaker. You
Hmm.
know, you guys run a consulting company, right? And then what you say is like, well, we'll be done with COVID soon, and and then it doesn't happen, and they blame you,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
And so they're like, well, you're too positive. And even to this day, when I watch your news interview, right,
mm-hmm,
you have a very positive spin about the real estate market here,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
And the general consensus is very people are very tend to be very negative, right?
mm-hmm,
Now I talk about both sides. I do
mm-hmm,
say negative things about the real estate market,
mm-hmm,
but I see it. I'm not selling anything, right?
mm-hmm,
I'm
mm-hmm.
just looking at it from my point of view. This is what I'm experiencing. This is the data I'm looking at, right? And so, like, I was like, well, I wonder if David is like just putting a positive spin on everything because his business is in the business of transacting real estate.
Well, you could look back in the 90s if you can get material about the things I said in the 90s. I was known as the most negative person in the
Really?
market because I, the market's falling. So I
Uh,
call it
yeah.
as I see it.
Right.
Well, right now the market's not falling. It's softening, right?
Yes.
And I've also said that the middle market condominium
It's
space
taking a
is
hit.
being destroyed right now, right? With 80% um, default rates in the last 18 months.
Right.
I'm probably the only person
80%.
80% default rates in purchases in the last 18 months, which is why you have so many RFOs available today. Now, I look at that, okay? I look at the same chart that people will say, and everyone else is going to say it's a really bad time to buy. Don't own real estate. Blah 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 blah. I go and say, what the fuck are you talking? Sorry, what the hell are you talking about? Sorry,
Yes.
what the hell are you talking about? Because this is the best time to buy real
It's
estate.
so freaking funny because those same people have been saying that we're in a real estate bubble since I got here in 2010. Right? These are the people that are
Yeah,
saying it's overpriced. It's
yeah,
been an asset bubble, and it has. It's been on a bull run forever. It's
yeah,
like market corrections don't happen on a regular basis here.
yeah,
Well, at least for the last 20 years.
yeah. You know why? Because we are so scarred from the 90s and the
What
80s and the
happened?
70s. The 30-year crisis of the Philippines from 1965 till about 2005.
Remind us all what happened. I don't know all about
Marcos.
Philippine history. I
Well,
know about
okay,
Marcos.
we had glory years of President Marcos, but then we also had the bad years, starting with 1972 when martial law was imposed,
Right.
and then in the chaos that ensued after that, the 20-year dictatorship, and everything that I said earlier, it took that long, and then because of pure accident, the Philippines benefited from both two things that made the Philippines so counter-cyclical. The two things are overseas remittances.
What was it? What was the first one?
The overseas remittances, the
Okay.
first one, where now we have 11.5 million people abroad sending 30, 40, 50
Which
billion.
which is a big form of liquidity in this country.
Yeah, yeah. That then becomes a safeguard for the poor,
Right.
right? The low end. That's why the low end's climbing faster.
Uh-huh.
And then you've got the BPO industry, which really started to be here in year 2001 when Global Crossing wired the entire country with fiber. A company called Global Crossing, which then got wiped out after the tech bubble. So, but we have to thank that company
Uh-huh.
because they wired the world with fiber, and it made the E1 and T1 line, which is these big lease lines,
Right, right.
fall in value. The E1 and T1 line, which is a cable from the US to the Philippines, used to cost $40,000 a month. A month. Okay, so the E1 T1 line used to cost $40,000 in year 2000. Okay,
Jesus.
a month for one T1 line, E1 line. And today, it's what, $1,000?
Right.
So, but it went from 40,000 to like 1,500 in like 3 years or 4 years
Wow.
because of sheer accident
Right.
of
So
global crossing.
so the world got, fibered up, and you have BPOs running, which is another, you have OFWs, BPO. That's where the liquidity is coming from. Um, and then what happened?
Then the boom happened. Then the boom protected us because of these two sources of income and jobs for the Philippines. It insulated us from so many crises
Hmm.
that the world went through. You had the Argentinian debt crisis, you've got the Latin American debt crisis, you've got the Euro debt crisis, you've got the GFC.
Even
You've
the '08 crash, we didn't get hit as hard, right?
the 2008 was a rich person's crisis because nobody owns stocks, nobody
Yeah.
owns
Right.
bonds. What the hell is a
Right.
derivative? What the hell is all these other fancy investment banker terms
Right. And
and
we didn't
products?
buy into the mortgage market in the US. Filipinos did, right? So,
The high end had all these derivative products sold to them by Goldman,
right.
by BofA, by Merrill,
Right.
by UBS, all those guys,
Yeah.
and burned all that well. So that then became another reason for property prices to come in and for liquidity to increase because after the GFC, all the wealthy of Philippines started saying, "Oh my God, it took me a generation, took me my life to come up with all this wealth, work hard, save hard, live frugally, and I give it to the investment banker, and the investment banker burns it in 3 months.
So just put it in properties.
So screw it.
Park it.
I'm
Park
gonna
it.
manage. What the hell was I thinking? Leaving it to these guys who don't
Right.
know stuff about. So they pulled their money back, and they poured it in property. And that was the that's why if you look at the currency, it was so strong from
Hmm.
2008, 2010, 2016. Prior to
Pesos and
2008, before to 2008, every Filipino that was wealthy or any Filipino will convert their money to dollars.
right.
And that's why there's always this constant exodus of money.
Right.
That's why it was always, 50, 52, 53, 56.
But
But
now
then
that
after 28, it moved from 56 to
I
41.
remember that. Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
and it wasn't like a blip. It was like over a good run,
Uh-huh.
you know?
And then they ended up buying a bunch of assets here.
Yeah. So the best, just like what we're seeing in Japan now, or
Hmm.
maybe you come in at 56, you sell your asset at 41, then you make a
Right.
double whammy income
Exactly.
where one is tax free because
Well,
it's all currency. Yeah.
Japan. And so this happened in the Philippines, and it just kept going. And and then you had all these cash buyers,
Hmm.
right? And you had all these properties paid out for cash, and people parking their it's basically a bank account,
Hmm.
right?
And we have to thank AMLA. AMLA is the anti-money laundering law.
How did that play into it?
So before, when you made money, regardless of source, you will convert it to dollars, give it to your banker, and the banker say, "Thank you very much. Let's ship it to Switzerland, to the U.S." With AMLA, you couldn't do that anymore. So the exit got shut. So all the money's trapped here.
That makes so much sense now.
So how much does the Philippine government spend in a year? Today, it is 5 trillion pesos.
Uh-huh.
Government spending, huh? Not borrowings.
Right.
This is just money from government pocket
This is
out.
this is not pocketed money. This is actual
Spend,
spent
yeah,
money.
on
Okay.
salaries, on
Right.
infrastructure, on whatever. Toilet paper, on office rent, all
Uh,
that. The budget of the government is 5 trillion pesos. Okay.
wow. Yeah, okay.
So just imagine how much of that is lost
Going
and
out,
siphoned,
right?
siphoned to
Right.
corruption.
Right. And being sent to Switzerland or
No, no,
whatnot.
no, no. Not being said is just siphoned out of government projects
Oh, I
into
mean,
the pockets of people.
I don't know the exact percentage, but the general thinking is quite a lot, right?
Let's
So
let's pretend it's 30%.
okay.
So 5 trillion, 30% of that is 1.5 trillion pesos.
Quite a lot, yeah.
And then how many elected positions are there in the Philippines? 19,200.
Right. Where are they putting
So
that money?
you divide 1.5 trillion by 19,200. I don't know what that number is. It's too big for my brain. But per capita, assuming you distribute all that equally, that's kind of a hefty chunk of budget that you can
Right.
only buy so much Louis Vuittons and fancy shoes for your girlfriend. At the
So,
end of that, the biggest chunk of moving that money is into real estate, which is what's supporting a big chunk of the market.
you're the only person I can get to actually admit this because I was always thinking, I was like,
So you
okay.
all heard it here. If my car blows up or if you stop, I disappear, you know what
But
happens.
we all know this, and we know there is purposely. I think there's always been a purposefully lack transparency in real estate for this very reason, because there doesn't people don't want there to be transparency. The powers to be don't
Yeah.
want there to be
Yeah.
transparency.
That's fair. Yeah.
Right.
Which is why it's always a struggle.
Right.
I got asked the other day, what about foreign direct investments? Well, what about it? Well, when are we going to open up? Well, we'll never open up for as long as the certain people in power want to keep the economy closed
Right.
for themselves.
Right. And why wouldn't they? Why would
Why
they
would they?
for if they're the ones in power, why would they want to open it up? They have no
Yeah.
reason to,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I look back and I say, where would my career have been if I didn't have the training from the foreigners that taught me a work ethic that is required to be successful? Where would the work ethic be if I didn't have the Chinese background of like, you know what? I don't care if you were sleeping 5 hours and you're 14 years old.
Yeah.
Fucking get off the bed and wake up early, despite all that, and be at the store by 8:30.
Right.
Period. And you close it. You're the last one out. You're gonna lock the gates. And before you do that, you gotta clean up, count inventory, close the gates. You're 15, you're 14. I don't care. Homework, I don't care. Just do it. Get it done.
If you have the brains and the work ethics here, you go pretty far, right?
Well, yeah,
Can
but
you
other
can
people
you
have to open it. You
right?
also
So you
have
got it.
you
The
need
third part.
integrity.
Well, okay.
Integrity.
The third part of it is your network.
Network.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you need to have a strong network here.
The network happens when you have
Good integrity.
goodwill. When you have goodwill. So and that's I think one of the things that was imposed on me at an early age is to appreciate goodwill.
What does goodwill mean to you?
Um, I guess trust and integrity. Like I remember, like that story I told you about my mom. I was the eldest, so I was
Mhm.
the most able-bodied person to help her carry goods
Mhm.
from, you know, jeepney from tricycle walk, tricycle, jeepney to San Juan Station to Divisoria
Yeah.
to Ortigas and back to Divisoria, back to San Juan. I was the one who was old enough to, big enough to carry goods for her, and people would trust her with the goods in the morning and say, "Okay, I trust that you will get these goods from me. You will sell it as you say you will in the afternoon, and in the evening you come back and you pay me. Okay, we're good.
Right.
No contract, no like, okay, here's my dog for my collateral or whatever. It's
Yeah.
just character loan, character trust, word of mouth. And the Chinese banks or the banks sometimes still do character loans up to today.
Hmm.
You know,
Wow. How do they? That's wow. How do they determine that? Right. I guess
it's
just personal
just
relationship. Right.
trust. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just relationship.
Wow.
And
So
yeah,
yeah, I agree with you. Like that's something I learned at a very early age when it comes to business ethics. Um, my reputation was the most important thing to me, right? In terms of, um, I never screwed over. Even if I had the bad deal and I was on the bad end of the stick, I just pay it. If if it's just a matter of money and I can protect my reputation, I just pay it,
mm,
right?
mm,
So I definitely believe in that. And here, it pains me to see how sometimes people can be short-sighted, right? And I think, there's a lot of scams here in the
yeah,
Philippines,
yeah, yeah,
especially in real estate.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I'm sure you
yeah.
I'm sure you think similar to me. It's like,
Yeah, so I go to the market and public and say, okay, I'm asked all the time, where would you put your money? And I would still say the same things, Bonifacio, Makati, Alabang. And then if you want to be adventurous, then go outside these areas. But if you don't have access in these three locations, you should. That's your first priority,
right.
right? But then they will say, oh, you're saying that because you want to sell me something. It's like, well, are you using me to buy these?
Right,
No, yeah,
right,
right? So
right. No. I,
oh, like you're only saying that because you have assets in these places.
right,
I go, oh, are you the one buying it off me, or am I that powerful
right.
to influence the market with just a word or a statement?
Well, you're putting your name out there, your face is out there, you know. You're not gonna, you know, and that's the power of what we're doing right now,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
We're having a real conversation. Judge me if you will, but this is me.
Mm.
I'm putting my face and my reputation on the line, saying what I'm saying. You're just
Mm.
doing the same thing,
Yeah.
So, trust us if you don't want to trust us, but we're putting our necks out here,
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
right?
Yeah. And that's why for me in investing, it's always about security. A client of mine taught me that you work so hard in your primary job to make the money you make, okay, to save the money you save.
Hmm.
You're not going to get that money now that you've worked so hard for and then put it in another high risk investment. What you want to do is to diversify.
Hmm.
You generate from a high risk operation
Low risk
and move it to a low risk asset.
real estate.
Sometimes it's real estate, you know. A big chunk of my life, I didn't have real estate because I couldn't afford the ones that I wanted.
Hmm.
But I was fortunate enough to pick the right stocks, and I was able to ride that big boom that happened from 2003 to, I would say, 2007.
Hmm. You're the first one who's ever really explained to me in details where I can understand why there's been such a long bull run in the Philippines. And thank you for that.
Counter cyclical.
Right.
It's
Counter
counter
cyclical.
cyclical. Yeah.
But are we on the cusp of a correction? Because I can't help but see that everything is pointing towards that. Where's the liquidity going to come from? Where's the money coming
No, the
from?
debt levels are too low. The debt levels are too low. Now, what's happening in the mid space?
Uh huh.
The mid space, um, a lot of the middle market
80%
aspired
default, like you said.
in the last 2 years. Okay, across all brands,
Uh-huh.
no exception. In the high end, very different story. The default rates are negligible,
Right.
and they would be happy to take the asset back because they'll flip it at
Right.
50% premium,
They're paying it
right?
cash anyways, most.
So the minute market lost their jobs, victims to inflation, the price of like a cup of rice then in 2 years, 3 years became so different times everything, fuel, all that. So that really wore them out. You know, the low end of the market have the overseas remittances to protect them and save them.
Right.
You know, the high end have savings and low debt.
Right.
The middle end
Get screwed.
is the meat in the sandwich. They're the ones who got eaten by inflation, high interest rates, their loans kicked up for
Just for
repricing,
us.
and
Yeah.
bang, they got hit.
Right.
Fortunately, in the Philippines, which is again something that people don't appreciate, interest rates here moved from 5-6% to 9%.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
That's nothing. You compare that to like so many people in the US who got repriced from 1.7% to 6.
Yeah. That's much bigger
You,
impact on your payments.
you look at Singapore, where interest rates went from 2% to 9%.
Right. You have to think the middle market crashing is going to
Not
drag
not
the other.
crashing, not crashing. It's not crashing.
Okay, what would you call it? A correction? If you're
It,
talking about
I would say it's
80% default, first of all,
yeah.
what percentage of the middle market is financed?
A lot, a lot. And so all the companies do, all the conglos do is foreclose. So there's this thing called Masada, I think it's Masada law. The Masada law, where they have to refund to you a portion of your payments.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So if you default and you've been paying for more than 2 years, you have to pay a certain percentage. Now, please forgive me for not having it off the top of my head what those
Right.
things are, but there is a law that protects people from that. So it's no developers are not incentivized to take over your unit that you've defaulted because by law they have to refund you a portion of that. Okay?
So it's the developers that are paying this
the-
back, not the bank.
Hmm?
Not the banks. The developers are paying back a portion
Mm.
of the default.
Oh, the default, yeah. Okay. So
Do you know what that portion might be? I'm curious.
it could be as high as 50% of what you've paid for.
Wow.
Yeah. So as a person who's defaulting on payments, you actually have at least a 50% recovery. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that's your safety net.
Okay.
You're not going to get everything back. You got to
Right.
be fair
Right.
to the guy who built the building
Right.
also,
Right.
but at least you get half back. And what does the developer do? Well, okay, I have enough of my balance sheet because my borrowings have been low because they've been very disciplined.
Uh-huh.
They've been transparent.
Uh-huh.
Okay. They'll absorb the hit. And what are they doing now? They're trying to dump it, or not, sorry, dump it is too harsh for a word, but they're reselling these assets right now for rent to own schemes, right?
Right.
Which,
So
why would you not take advantage of
of
that?
course the rent to
Oh
own
my
schemes,
God.
but I haven't seen like a true rent to own yet. Well, I'll get that. I'll get into that. But
But the terms are so much better.
yeah.
So much
Right.
better.
Right.
And how many times in the last 20 years or even 30 years are developers put in a situation like this?
I would imagine quite a lot. No?
Very few times.
So
Because
this is unprecedented. Like this default rate wasn't happening before.
yes, but it's coming up. I'm not saying that every condo unit owner has defaulted on the rate. Okay, the people who bought in the last 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
or the people who bought place in the last 3-4 years, defaulted on their payments in the last two. Okay, so while that number sounds big, you're not talking about in absolute terms. You're not talking about a big chunk of the market because you're only talking about a fraction of the buyers that have happened in the last 3, 4, 5 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But from a developer's perspective, it's like, wow, this has never happened before at these levels.
Right.
It's normal to have some attrition
Uh-huh.
and you can absorb that easily. But now, in order to cover for that,
But doesn't the buyers prior to that, they're still on what, a 10-year, 15-year term. They're
Oh no,
experiencing
no,
it
no.
too.
We're so these are all pre-selling. I'm talking about the pre-selling market.
Oh, okay.
The
So you're
pre-selling
saying
market,
80% default on the pre-selling, not
not
after it's been
not
turned over.
not after
Not
it's been turned over.
okay. So
No.
when you say default, you're not talking about bank financing
Yeah,
default.
yeah. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So yes, the developers who are pre-selling their units
Okay.
experience a 80% default
Okay.
in the buyers of condos.
That makes sense because they haven't turned over the property. Sure,
Yeah,
they should refund
yeah,
back some of the
yeah,
money.
yeah,
And then they can resell it at full price if they wanted to, if
yeah,
they could.
yeah. If they
Right.
can,
Right.
if they can. Now,
What
the
about the
default
default
rates
rates on the banks
in the
and the
bank,
bank financing?
it's been going up, but the absolute percentage of that is still fairly low. It's like 3%, 4%. It's not at alarming levels
Why is this so low?
because people are really afraid to borrow.
So the ones that do borrow are really
Yeah,
committed to it.
yeah. Well, go into it.
I mean, so what is the reason why? I mean, that's surprisingly low considering everything that's going on.
Because there are so many avenues for safety nets for alternative financing. Either because they got this government subsidy or their relative from abroad is coming in to save them. There's so many avenues for relative.
This
Because
is all through family
because the
connection then.
family network is so big,
Right.
regardless of the strata of where you
Uh-huh.
are in the ladder, they're able to find ways to get funding.
Because I'd be surprised. I mean, I've never heard of any government
There's
substitutes in
also
the Philippines that actually help.
well, you have Ayuda that came in Ayuda for, and then you have during COVID and the lockdowns, the banks were compelled to stretch the payments
Mm,
for defaulting
right. Okay.
borrowers. So, and then you cannot discount this small part of the market that addresses a big chunk of this mid end market, which is the girlfriend market. So yeah, and then and then the
Do
other
you want to
thing.
do you want to
No, no,
elaborate?
no,
Do,
no,
do
no,
you want
no.
to?
It's okay. It's
I
okay.
don't
It's
know
okay.
what you
I'm
mean.
gonna get bashed even more. The other thing by people who I may or may not know, and then the other part here is the lost my train of thought.
I'm so curious about this girlfriend market.
The yeah, and then the other issue here is the myth on renting.
Uh-huh.
People think that by renting you're throwing money away, and that is the most ridiculous thing ever, right? I'm renting. I've been renting for the last 8 years where I stay.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
You
and
don't you don't own the asset that you
no, I
live
don't
in,
own the asset that I.
but you have assets you rent out.
Yeah, I have assets that I rent out, right?
That's that's what a true investment is, right?
When I was starting out for many years, I just kept renting for like 12, 15 years. I just kept renting. And as I was renting, I was building an asset base that I used to invest.
Uh-huh.
And the best, most efficient place to generate wealth and drive investments is in the stock market.
Yes, you should generally get a higher return on the stock market, especially in the Philippines, right? It's generally speaking a higher return than rental yields.
Well, yes and no, because if you look at the last 10 years, many of the stocks that are solid brands would have given you marginal returns over a 10-year
Hmm.
period. Absolute terms. Okay.
Hmm.
There are a few outliers, but it's
But just like you
being
said,
able to time the market.
right. So, but just like you said, the Wall Street market is corrupt, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I have I haven't wrapped my head around. Well, I don't have the option to invest in the Philippine stock market.
It's so
I would
easy.
trust. No, I'm a U.S. citizen, so I'm still trying to. Yeah, I can't. Most banks won't take me. FATCA issues and stuff like that. Maybe there'll be a brokerage out there that will take me, but
I think the CUL Financial, just try it. Try them out.
really,
Yeah.
okay. I have this problem everywhere in the world outside the U.S.
Ah, okay. Okay. Okay.
Most banks don't want to deal with
On a US citizen.
U.S. requirement, so they rather just not take the customer. Right.
But
So
only if it's in dollars. No?
doesn't matter. Doesn't
It
matter.
applies to all U.S.
Yeah.
citizens.
I have
Okay.
to report every one of my bank accounts and
Mm-hmm.
financials. So, anyways,
Oh,
that's a
you
little
can
off
ask a
topic.
girlfriend.
So that's the
Dummy account.
girlfriend market.
Yeah, yeah. You can ask your girlfriend to kind of have a dummy account.
Yeah.
You know.
There's a lot of liquidity in the girlfriend market, no?
I don't know.
I'm sure.
I'm just told.
I'm sure. Where were we? Okay, so we're talking about okay. There's no crap. You don't. There's a correction, obviously.
Mm.
There's got to be a correction. I'm surprised that the bank default rates aren't higher,
Mm.
considering the
Mm.
terms of the loan.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They're not very favorable terms compared to world standards. It's not like Japan where it's like 1 to 2% interest rate. It's not like the U.S. where you get a fixed rate. You know.
Yeah, but those are you can't compare those markets. You know, we're a developing country. Things are not as transparent nor efficient. So you got to compare it with like other countries of like
Right, but with all
standing.
things consideration, the default rate isn't
Yeah,
higher.
because I think there's a lot more transparency in this market than many markets. I
Mhm.
mean, look at the havoc that China is going through right now, right? Because everyone's lying about everything.
The developers aren't returning 50% on their defaults, all right, in China.
They can't because they
They don't
themselves
have
are
no money. Yeah,
defaulting.
yeah,
They're all defaulting, right?
right.
And then what does China decide to do? $5 trillion bailout.
Yeah,
I mean, what the
they're
hell?
they're they're printing their way
Anyway,
out.
and then Vietnam, right, with all the scams that's going on there, and Malaysia was all the scams that's going on there. And it seems to me that the publicly listed companies here are just a lot more honest generally.
Okay.
Partly because they're owned disproportionately by the same people.
Uh-huh.
So, like for example, a publicly listed company of let's say a particular conglomerate will own 50 to 70% of the company. So there's only so much lying to yourself you can do, right? Whereas in the US, where the founder has been diluted to like 7%, 10%
Right,
ownership, okay, it's
right,
worth billions, but then
right.
he's got a lot of elbow room
Mm-hmm.
to kind of fudge numbers,
Right, or incentive.
an incentive to fudge numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So very different metrics. And I think, and that's all because of the care that we had to take learning from the 97 crisis.
Hmm. Oh, wow. This is a very different perspective that I've gotten from you. Thank you for this.
Hmm.
This is very interesting.
Hmm.
Um,
That's why I think the stock market in the Philippines is so underrated, underappreciated. I mean, why would all these companies, I mean, DMCI trading at like 4 times, 5 times earnings? It doesn't make any sense.
compared to the US
I
markets,
don't know
right? What's the
what's
average PE ratio in the
uh,
US? T, can you Google search for us?
no, forget it. The
Don?
the PE ratio of the Magnificent Seven. I don't know. I don't
Is
know
it
the
called Magnificent Seven now? No, it's
it's
not the Fangs. It's a
the Magnificent Seven or the seven tech stocks
okay.
that's like, huh?
Yeah, the PE ratio of the Magnificent Seven, or hell, just do the PE average PE ratio of the S&P 500.
No, because these seven comprise 45% of the market cap of the US stock market.
Right. Okay.
So they're
It's
larger than many countries combined.
and it's comparable to the conglomerates here.
Yeah, comparable to conglomerates here.
Apple 34.07,
That's okay.
Google
That's okay.
21.82, Meta 24.49,
Okay. So they're rebalancing because
Microsoft 35.07,
so they've all been generating income. That's why.
and Nvidia 63. Oh no, 20,
63.
23,
Okay. It used to
29.06.
be it's a different story from what it was uh just 2 years ago.
Right.
I mean, what was Tesla's PE before they
I
started
don't
making
even know.
money, right? I mean, Nvidia's PE just dropped to those levels recently because they started
Uh-huh.
making gazillions.
Right.
So, but the total market cap of that seven is like 15 or 17 trillion
Hmm.
dollars. 17 trillion. Each of those companies are 2, 3 trillion in size dollars. So that's like 10, 11 times the GNP of the Philippines. It's crazy how one company could be valued that much, right?
It's crazy, yeah. I mean,
They have like 100,000
but
people.
it just keeps going. It just keeps going. Speculation just
So
keeps
that's
going.
that's my
Liquidity.
worry.
Look, so you mentioned it earlier, right? So all countries are they're in so much debt. Inflation is happening all over the world, other than Japan, and central banks can't just keep doing the same thing anymore, right? And so everyone thinks, okay, well, we started raising interest rate, got inflation, slow down inflation, we got inflation under control. Now, China prints what, $5 trillion or something like that? What's going to happen now? That's got to have a trickle down effect because how much of that money is staying in China?
Well, they're doing everything they can to keep it there in there. That's why they're clamping on everyone, not just the pogo sector, as what many people believe, but every dollar that's leaving China is being monitored, scrutinized quite heavily.
I see real estate all over the world, man. These Chinese buyers are coming out of the woodwork. I mean,
Mm.
they're everywhere.
So going back to Philippines, that's why I think there's quite a bit of um there's a support level that's actually quite high and credible. The only way it will take quite a bit of a crisis, a really massive crisis, to kind of to change that.
Right.
One is, I think, if we found out that the biggest companies here are lying, grossly lying about their balance sheet
Mm-hmm.
figures,
Mm-hmm.
their P&L, which I really doubt. I
Mm-hmm.
can't imagine Ayala or SM or the Gokongwei is doing that. So, um, or there's got to be a massive political instability, which is not happening. Despite all the noise
Mm-hmm.
today, even today, no way. Um, so the only risk I would see would be climate change risk. One massive storm that hits Manila and decimates Manila.
So it's still a stable market.
Still a stable market. Yeah.
Right.
And you
So
look at the high end. I mean, despite everything that we've been through, my God, I mean, prices in Forbes Park continue to climb 2 to 5% a year, despite
right.
lockdowns, COVID.
Right.
You, you're a business owner.
Mm-hmm.
You're a big business owner to be able to afford a 1 billion peso home,
Mm-hmm.
right? And all your businesses got shut down during COVID,
Mm-hmm.
despite how diversified you are, and you're
Mm-hmm.
still able to buy Forbes Park for cash,
Yeah. Yeah. No, this
right?
country definitely is not a poor
So,
country.
so, and it's not just in Forest Park. It's Ayala Alabang, which is
Yeah.
rich also, but not Forbes rich.
Right.
New Valley,
Yeah.
or Hillside or whatever. It's you
You,
see it all over.
you just recently had an article about the vacancy rates here, and
Office, office.
office and
Yeah,
residential too, right?
yeah.
Pogo's moving out had a
Oh
big
yeah, yeah,
contribution to that,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And there's no real data on vacancy rates, right? So it's a lot of I don't know how you guys come up with that number.
We go door to
Is there
door,
sample
man.
size?
No, you we
Well,
go
you can't obviously
we
you can't
go
go door to door to
we go
every
door to
property, right?
door, and we talk to the management of every building that we
Uh
cover,
huh.
and we cover close to 200 buildings in the
Okay.
city. I mean, that's the F. And by the way, unlike many other firms, we have like 40 people, and all they do is churn through stuff like
Data.
this, right?
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, if I don't know if you've been to the office recently, but I'm more than happy to have you over. We got
I've never been to your
about
office.
30, 40 people. All they do is churn. I mean, that anyway. So, yeah, and we try to get as credible information as we can about the vacancies of these things. And second is that there are a couple of Chinese dudes that own 1,000 apartments each.
Uh huh.
So you talk to that one guy, you don't have to talk to 1,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Right.
um, and they have all the data.
Right.
So you got a couple of Singaporeans that own 200 apartments. You've got one Phil Chai guy
Uh
with
huh.
200 apartments. So it's not like,
Okay. So you have a good enough sample size just from that.
yeah.
So what is the estimated vacancy rates currently?
In the office market, it's 17% down from 19. And I have to stress, regardless of what people say about the office market,
Mm,
that the Philippines is in super good shape, because the Philippine problem in the office market is a supply problem. It is not a demand problem. In New York, where the vacancy is 17%. You have 17 million square meters of vacant space.
Yeah. The work
Okay.
from home and
Because of
everything.
work from home and a lot of other reasons why the vacancy is that high. 70 million is the equivalent of like all office space in the Philippines vacant.
Wow.
Just imagine that,
Yeah.
right?
That's
And I
huge.
just came from New York. I just came from San Fran. It's scary. I mean, my God, it's frightening there.
So
But
we've always had a supply issue with commercial offices here.
no, just in the last few years,
Okay.
right? And it's only a matter of time before that corrects because the problem is simple. It's just solved by time. Every year, we're going to just keep eating through this office space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So at some point, it will stabilize very soon. So Bonifacio, first one out,
Mm-hmm. Of
right?
course. Yeah.
So I think by first quarter next year, it should achieve equilibrium between supply and demand. Then you're going to see rents rise again.
Nice. Okay.
The market in Alabang and Makati, 2 to 3 years. 2 years max for
Mhm.
Makati, 3 years max for Alabang. Okay. Every other market outside these I mentioned is going to take 5 years. Just for the
To
momentum
recover. Yeah.
of the demand to absorb it.
Right.
So the office market is in good shape. We just built too much office space. And despite the vacancy, our landlords coming down and said, I will give you a 70% discount in rents. No. You know how many times I've been turned down by developers who say, you know what, David, I like this deal, but tell them to go somewhere else. It's like, dude, you've been sitting in this space for 3 years vacant. It's okay. Just go somewhere else. Now, is that
That sounds like
that
the
doesn't sound like a crisis situation to
no,
me,
that actually
right?
sounds like very much like the residential market too. No?
Strong-handed is the
Right.
term.
Right. So the residential market is similar, right? What do
So
you think is the residential vacancy
it,
rates?
it, it depends because I think in the high end, the market vacancy there is high. But then if you own 10 apartments and one's vacant for 10 years, who
You don't
cares?
care because you're
Right?
all it's all cash
And it's
bought
like,
anyways.
you inherited this thing from your dad or your grandfather.
Yeah.
Your cost of acquiring is zero,
Right.
right? Then you just, okay, you pay the juice and the juice are like,
Yeah.
stupidly low.
Uh-huh.
So
And then your property taxes aren't
property
insane, right?
taxes is like you have a $4 million asset and then you're paying $1,000 a year in property taxes.
Right.
$1,000 a
Right.
year on a $4 million
That's extremely low,
asset.
yeah. Is it really that low?
It's low.
Is that the average? That seems a little
It's
low.
not well,
$4 million
it's
to
pro rata.
Okay.
Meaning if you own the condo,
Uh-huh.
that proportion is probably similar.
Okay. Right. Huh. So residential rates, similar behavior. People are just going to hold on to their properties, and they're not going to drop their rental rates too much.
Some have, like especially in the middle market,
Mm-hmm.
from the studio unit that's like used to lease out at 30,000 pesos is now for rent at 10,000 pesos.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you? So, before the Pogo market was here, the locals were all saying, oh, your price is out. Okay, well, now that they're gone, what are you waiting
Yeah.
for?
Yeah.
They're still not taking it,
Right.
you know? I mean, you had every opportunity as a local to buy as many assets as you want,
Uh-huh.
even before the Pogos were here. Were you buying assets? No. What are you talking about then? You know,
Yeah.
it's the disconnect is funny
Yeah.
sometimes. So I'm not saying there are no distressed deals. There are very few distressed deals.
Well, this is where I want to get to because
Hmm.
I've been investing in real estate and it's always been a bull run everywhere in the world. I've been holding my breath for corrections, even a crash for opportunities, right? Because that's where, you want to take advantage of those opportunities, right? They,
But what you and I couldn't predict is the amount of QE that offsets all
of course,
rationality.
right?
You and I
Especially
are
during COVID,
yeah, you and I are
right?
calling it right. But
Right,
then this black swan got offset by a white swan, which is what QE.
right.
So the market buys another 2 years.
There's just too much money in the world,
You're just kicking the can down.
right?
Yeah.
But it's going to happen eventually.
Who knows? Which is why one of the things that Jamie Dimon said recently, the CEO of JP Morgan, is that there's a higher chance that high interest rates will be here for a while. Like he's talking 5 years.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think inflation is just, inflation is public
And it's
enemy number one.
and it's caused by QE.
Absolutely. We've been saying this for decades, since the '08. Like, this is the birth of Bitcoin and everything else. And,
Bitcoin at
you know,
95. Bitcoin at 95.
do you
Eh,
see that? Yeah. What do you think? You think it's fool's gold?
What do I know? I don't know anything.
The funny thing is, like, I talk to very successful entrepreneurs, guys who have exited tech companies that are barely coming around to crypto. But like, so I come from the online gambling space, right? So we've been talking about it for ages, and it's the ultimate hedge, right? Well, how else do you hedge? The one thing you can bet on is the governments are going to just debase their currency, right? You know that's 100% bet. One thing you can, and if you can democratize that, and if the rules hold up within the system,
In
you
Bitcoin,
cannot, yeah,
in crypto.
you cannot. No one has control over it. No one can dilute it.
But
It's
they,
decentralized, right?
no, yeah, but that's what they all say. But then what's the reality? The reality is that any guy with enough brains
Can
and
hack it.
can hack you.
It hasn't happened yet. Don't you think the U.S. government would have
It's
hacked
happened
it
to
if they could have? Oh, you mean take the money from your wallet?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's happened so many
that
times.
has
And
happened.
then liquidating a coin takes what? How many days?
Yeah, but that's because we're in its infancy, and governments are not friendly to it
I don't
because
know. Well,
obviously it's a threat to
that's
their
why,
currency.
I it's like I found it ridiculous it was at 2000.
Uh huh.
I found it ridiculous it was at 25,000. I found it ridiculous it was back at 1.8 or 1.6 and now 90, 92, 95. I don't know.
Make no mistake about it. There is going to be sell side pressure on that 100K, and then once it breaks past the 100K, speculation is going to come
I, I
roaring through again.
I met somebody who said a few days ago that he sees it at 150.
Yeah. Well, you probably didn't see a 100K either, right? So why couldn't it happen? Right? With enough speculation, with enough, and this is like you said, it's like just like the real estate market. It's largely driven with all of the liquidity in the market.
Mm, mm,
Where else is this money going?
mm.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is happening to stocks. This is happening to properties. This is happening to every asset class.
Mm-mm.
So, anyways,
Except Philippine stocks, which is still ridiculously low.
undervalued.
Yeah.
I'll take that. I should definitely look more into this. You're not the first one who's told me this. So solid valuations in Philippine stock. So if you guys don't know, maybe you guys should start paying attention, like I should. Okay, so I want to ask you a few more questions before we go. Um, I'm dying to ask you this question. What are the biggest problem? Okay, let me rephrase this question. Well, I'll ask you this question and I'll rephrase it. What are the big problems you see holding back Philippines real estate from getting to the next level? Um, or do you see any problems at all? Or if you could solve one problem within the Philippines real estate market, what would it be?
I think property rights, whether it's intellectual, real estate,
You talking
it's
about title registration?
everything. Everything. Like your brand. Like, you come up with a brand and then it's copied somewhere and then you find loads of it in Green Hills.
Okay.
Intellectual property, for
Okay.
example. So real estate property and all the scams that happened just because some local government office got burned down
Or
and all the
flooded.
titles disappear all in flames, which again, the blockchain people are saying, well, that's why we have blockchain. Anyway, so I think property rights, if we can protect that and uphold that, I think that's great. Stability, because the Philippines has so many laws, huh?
Hmm.
We are not void or lacking of any laws. It's just we don't implement any of them, or hardly any are implemented. You know, um, yeah. If we can just do that, the rest will follow. But what does it take to protect property rights here?
Doesn't that have to do with policy changes? Or is that just
You have to
adding
go
more
way deeper.
bullshit
You have to
laws?
go. You have to go deeper and deeper and deeper.
So how do you protect your rights? Because like I don't buy land because I'm a well, number one, I'm a foreigner. But if
Mhm.
I did, I'd be really nervous about it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, you
Because
should.
somebody else can claim that land after I purchased it. Some family member said, "Well, I wasn't. I was one of the rightful heir. You sold this property
Yeah,
without me."
yeah, yeah,
And then I got to battle that in court.
yeah. Which will
And
take decades.
and then I'm a foreigner. What's the
Mm.
chances I'm going to win, right?
Mm-mm. 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 Yeah.
So I agree with you.
So I don't know what the solution is, but that's probably the one problem. If we do solve it, we'll solve many other problems.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. I can
So what do you
imagine.
need there? You need transparency. You need enforcement. You need people who actually bother to care about enforcing the laws.
Hmm.
You need a clean judicial system. You need
You need to
efficiency
you
in the
need to stick
judicial system.
for, you know, and
For yeah, you need people to go to jail
yeah.
for the right reasons. Um, you need community to do their part. You know, if they can get away with it, people will try to do something to get away with it. We just have to. They will do something knowing that they would get away with it.
Right. Of
You
course.
know, and we have to change that mindset.
Of course. David, it's been amazing having you. This conversation was much better than I thought. And I
Really,
really,
thanks.
really appreciate you for having this conversation with me. I've been dying to have this
Really,
conversation with
thank you.
someone like you. I hope, and there's so many other topics that we could unpack. I swear we could do an hour long podcast for a lot of the things that you talked about. But you know, I'd love to have you again. This is a great talk. I hope you enjoyed this too. So if you guys like this content and consider subscribing, and if you guys agree with us, tell us what you think about what's going to happen to the Philippines real estate market. Tell us your opinion. Do you agree with David? Do you disagree? Ask us some questions. I'm sure David and I would be happy to answer you.